At Castle Rock, we made, I think, 7 Stephen King movies. But the things that we were gravitated towards initially were more of like Stand By Me, which was a character-driven piece. Shawshank Redemption, again, more of a character piece. Dolores Claiborne, The Green Mile. I mean, there were elements of supernatural in those, but it was more about the character. And so that's what we were drawn to Stephen King. Now, with Misery, again, it's more of a character piece. It's not, I mean, there are scary moments in it, but it's not like, it's more of a thriller. I started very early, when I was like 19 years old. I was at UCLA, and I started an improvisation group. It was called The Session. Richard Dreyfuss was in the group, Larry Bishop, Joey Bishop's son, and we were at UCLA. We were in the basement of Royce Hall, and we put together a show for over a period of about 6 months until the cops found us there and they kicked us out. But then we had a show that we had put together, and we had backers auditions, and we got somebody to agree to put us in a theater on Sunset Strip, and we started doing it. So I was already directing at that point, and I had directed even before that a production of No Exit at a theater in a playhouse in Beverly Hills, and so that's something I was always doing, even before I got the job on All in the Family. The weird thing is I never really talked to my dad about any of the things that I was doing in my career. I mean, he did see certain things. He came to see The Session when we were doing it, and he also came to see No Exit. And I remember him saying to me, and this was the first time he'd ever given me real, acceptance as somebody in show business. He came backstage afterwards and he looked me in the eye and he said, "That was good, no bullshit." And that was the first time he had ever said anything like that to me. And I visited him the next day at his house, and he said, "I'm not worried about you. You're going to be okay. Whatever you decide to do, you'll be okay." So I never really talked to him about it. Now, I did, as a teenager, go to the Van Dyke show, every summer. Every day I went with him to the studio, and I watched how things were done. I observed everything. So I learned, about how he did things, but I never talked to him about it. And what's interesting about all this is that when I was on television in those days, people on television were like second-class citizens. They were like the peons. There was the movie people and the TV people, and you couldn't make that crossover. Now you can do. Now everybody does. But it was a big deal to go from a television sitcom actor to become a director and in films, and nobody really wanted to let that happen. I think I was like, it was Ronnie Howard and then me, and then after that there was Gary Marshall and Penny Marshall and Danny DeVito and Jim Brooks and all these people, but it was not considered. You were definitely low man on the totem pole if you were in television. So that was hard for me. When I was at UCLA, I was in the theater department. I wasn't really studying film there. And, I've come to this as an actor and a theater director and not as a technical filmmaker. So the first film for me, Spinal Tap, people say, "Well, I can't believe it. You never made a film and you're making a film without a script," because there was no script, it was all improvised. And to me, that made sense because that's the background I had in improvisational theater. And I didn't know any better. I didn't know. It was not until I did The Sure Thing that it was like, oh, you got to figure out where the camera goes, and you got to, where's crossing the line. I mean, I didn't know anything about that stuff. So I kind of learned as I went along. But my theory was always put the audience in the best seat. Give them the best seat in the house. So wherever I wanted to be at a particular moment, that's where I put the camera. And so it's kind of worked. And then I've learned over the years, a lot of the technical things, I now know them. The first film that I made that I really felt reflected my sensibility was Stand By Me. And it was at the time, and still to me, the most important film for me, because it really was an extension of my personality. It had humor in it. It had some melancholy and sadness to it, which I have a mixture of that in my person. And so it became, you know, I didn't know if it was going to be successful. It became successful. And then I did Princess Bride after that. And after that, we formed Castle Rock. And Castle Rock was the name of the town in Stand By Me. So that was why I named the company that. And for me, the idea of the lighthouse, you know, as our logo was always about creating an atmosphere for filmmakers where they felt safe. That this is a place that they could come and they could feel safe, and they weren't being you know, hounded like they would be in a studio system. And I basically wanted to create the company with my partners. We all did it together to give myself a safe haven, to give myself a place to do things and not have to have people looking over my shoulder. We were actually doing great. I mean, for many, many years, you know, at least 10 years or more, we were making films that we were outperforming industry averages, making a lot of money. I mean, we made some really good films. And then we realized that, you know, because we didn't have a library, we were living hand to mouth, you know. It was just the bank, you know, the bank credit that we had that we kept feeding with the, you know, money we made from the films. And we thought, geez, we can't survive. We can't compete against studios by doing that. So that's when Ted Turner came in and he bought our company. And the mandate was that he wanted to create a studio and that we would, you know, we were making 3-4 films a year. Then we went to making 10 or 12 films a year, which was too much, you know, and you can't have good quality if you're making that many films. So we did that for a while, and we were still doing pretty good. And then Ted Turner realized, because he didn't, you know, he didn't have a network. You know, he had a library, but he didn't have a network. He said, I can't compete with these other companies that had bought, you know, television networks. So he sold the entire company, lock, stock, and barrel, to Warner Brothers, and then we became, you know, a production company inside Warner Brothers. My partner, my friend Andy Scheinman, was, you know, stuck at an airport, had nothing to do, and bought a paperback copy of Misery. And he started reading it because he liked Stephen King, and he read it and he said, wow, this is a great book. I wonder if anybody's ever, you know, tried to option this. And he figured, I'm sure they have, because it's in paperback. I mean, somebody would have, you know, Stephen King, they make so many movies out of his books. But it turned out they hadn't. And the reason they hadn't is because this was a very personal book to Stephen King. It was a book about in which he dealt with wrestling with this difficulty that all creative people have, which is being trapped by your own success. Here he was, you know, a writer of horror books, books with supernatural elements to it, and he also wanted to express himself as a writer. So he had this character, Paul Sheldon, who had become famous writing these misery novels, but wanted to break away and do something special. And Annie Wilkes represented the fan base that didn't want that to happen, would be very angry if he went in a different direction. It was a personal book, oddly enough to him, so he didn't want to he didn't want to option it to anybody unless he felt it was in good hands. And because he loved Stand By Me, and he had told me that it was the best adaptation of anything he had ever written, he said, I'll give it to you guys if Rob will either produce or direct it. So he felt comfortable that I would do it. And initially I was just going to produce it, but then as we got into it and I started thinking about it more, I started relating more to the character of Paul Sheldon.
Misery Chastain put braces on your daughter's teeth and is putting her through college. And what thanks does she get? You go and kill her.
I never meant for it to become my life. And if I hadn't gotten rid of her now, I'd have ended up writing her forever.
And I had felt trapped in a weird way by my own success on All in the Family. And when I finished All in the Family, they came to me and to Sally Struthers with tons of money to make a sequel, a spin-off of the show. And I thought, well, I could be doing that for the rest of my life. but I wanted to direct. I had wanted that even before All in the Family. So I held out and I said, I want to, and it took me, like I said, it was very difficult for me to make that transition. And so I understood what Paul Sheldon felt like, to be trapped in a certain amount of success and wanting to break out and do it. Now, what's interesting, in a weird way, with Spinal Tap, although it was an original kind of movie because nobody had ever done like a documentary, docudrama, whatever they want. I mean, mockumentary, whatever they call it. But it was satire. And my father had, lived and breathed satire. He was on Show of Shows, Caesar's Hour. That was his area. Then I did the Sure Thing, and that was like a, romantic comedy, essentially. And my father had done a number of those. So I felt, kind of in his footsteps. And then when I did Stand By Me, I felt like, okay, this is a break from the kinds of things that I was used to doing and knowing, having a connection with. And I was nervous. I didn't know if people were going to accept it or like it or whatever. They'd see me on All in the Family. They didn't know if they were. And the fact that they liked it gave me license to, pursue different things and things that I wanted to do. And so I did understand what that felt like for Paul Sheldon. I love thrillers. I love them. It's my favorite form of filmmaking. If you find a good thriller, I'm there. I'm there day one. But I'm not a person who makes thrillers. And you wouldn't think of me as somebody who makes a thriller. But when this came along, I said, I understand the character, and even though it's in the form of a thriller, I can tell this story. I understand this story. But if I'm going to do a thriller, I better learn what is the grammar of a thriller. And so I did. I watched every single Hitchcock movie. I was a fan of Hitchcock already, but I watched them all again. And I watched, any film noir I could get a hold of, out of the past. But anyway, I watched all these thrillers, and I learned there's a certain grammar to them, and there's a certain shape to them. And there's a lot of inserts. There's a lot of these, kind of wacky angles. I did this one time in Misery. There's a scene where she comes out on the porch and the rain is coming down and the lightning is flashing and it's a Dutch tilt. And I said, we got to have a Dutch tilt somewhere in this movie. It's, you can't have it. And so we canted the camera and did that one shot. I learned all that stuff, I went to school on it. We started with Kathy Bates, and Kathy Bates was actually suggested by William Goldman. William Goldman, who wrote the screenplay. And when he suggested her, I thought, oh, wow, she's terrific. I'd seen her on stage a number of times, and she's a brilliant actress. But, she had never done really a lead part in a film like this. And so I know how great she is. She came in and she sat in the office and I said, well, let's just take a look at a scene. I'm not exaggerating. She read like 2 lines.
They just cheated us. This isn't fair. He didn't get out of the cock-a-doodie car.
And I said, you don't have to read anymore. I said, that's enough. You can do this. And she said, what? I said, well, if you want, you can play the part. And she said, really? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, can I call my mother? I said, yeah, you can call your mother. So that's how I got Kathy Bates.
What do you think I say when I go to the feed store in town? Oh, now, Wally, give me a bag of that effing pig feed and 10 pounds that bitchly cow corn. And in the bank, do I tell Mrs. Bollinger, oh, here's one big bastard of a check. Give me some of your Christing money. There, look there. See what you made me do?
Kathy's a brilliant actress. And she had a great part, and that's what makes an Academy Award performance. She's got incredible craft, and this was a big opportunity for her in that she never had really carried a movie like this or played the lead. And her instinct a lot of the time, initially, was to really try to get inside this character. And I did have to say to her early on, I said, look, you have to trust the fact that you have a great instrument, you have a great facility, and you have great talent and great craft. Don't take this character home with you. You'll be driven crazy because the character is really, really sick. And so we talked about what caused that sickness and and so we wanted to make it specific. We didn't want it to be an all-purpose crazy person. There was a very specific pathology to her insanity, and we talked about it. We got through it. I said, but don't take that home with you. You know, you trust your own ability to call on that when you needed to, and she did. And I think, you know, it's one thing to, you know, there's a sense memory thing. Stanislavski talks about it all the time, you know, drawing on certain things. But then you have to have a facility to be able to do that. You don't have to be doing that all the time. Now, you know, some actors like to just live with the character and they don't want to ever break character and stuff. And, you know, I mean, if that's their way, that's their way. But I mean, for me, if you have you know, a craft and a facility, then you can draw on it.
Oh, Paul, what a poet you are.
With Paul Sheldon, that was a tough part to cast because there were a lot of people that I was looking at. I got turned down by a lot of people. I'm not telling any tales out of school. Jimmy knows this, Jimmy Kahn. I went after, you know, Robert Redford and Kevin Kline and William Hurt and Warren Beatty and, you know, Rick Dreyfuss, you know, lots of people, and they all turned it down. And so eventually, you know, I went with Jimmy Kahn, and I thought, you know, initially I thought, oh, I don't know, but it was perfect.
I know it sounds crazy, but I haven't written anything but misery for so long. Why don't you read it? And you can tell me what you think it's about. Maybe you can come up with a title.
You know, Jimmy's a very physical guy. He likes to move around, and here he was in a bed all the time, and I thought, well, that'll be great. I mean, he'll have to really play that frustration. And it was funny, every day I came to work and I would say to Jimmy, you know, I would act, you know, like a director. I go, okay, now Jimmy, in this scene, you're in bed. That's all I said to him every day. He'd lean in every time like I was gonna give him something really, this scene, you're gonna be in bed. That's all I said to him. I only know what I do as an actor director, and I would never ask an actor to do something that I didn't think I could do. And I'm not the best actor in the world, but I'm a decent actor, and you know, it's like being a coach of a basketball team. You know, you wouldn't say to somebody, you know, I want you to stop at half court and hit that shot every time. You know what I mean? You know you can't do it. But you can ask actors to do, if you can do it, and when I work on the script, because I write on all the scripts I do, you know, I rewrite stuff and I will make it so that I feel like it can fit in an actor's mouth. Now, I will tell an actor, if you feel that this is not fitting in your mouth, but we're getting the same sense of it, make it fit in your mouth so that you can say it. And, you know, I work that way. But again, I would never ask an actor to do something that I didn't think they could do. And so it makes it a little easier, I think. And now I've worked with other directors, you know, but they're really all have the ability. Like Mike Nichols has acted, and even Marty Scorsese has acted. I mean, these people, you know, Woody Allen, he's acted. I find that actors, in a weird way, make the best storytellers. Let's put it this way. They may not be the best filmmakers because they don't have the technical expertise a lot of times, but they can rely on good camera people. And I've had some great cameramen, you know, over the years. But you're a good storyteller because, to me, I mean, aside from, you know, franchise movies where it's, you know, you got the name of a man and a number in the title. Spider-Man 4, Batman 6, Superman, Iron Man 7, a man and a number. If you don't have that, and if you're doing a character-driven piece, the characters are the story. And so as an actor, to know how to realize a character is going to be helpful as a director, and I think that's what does help sometimes.
Night shifts can be lonely at a hospital. I did a lot of reading. That was when I first discovered Misery. She made me so happy. She made me forget all my problems. Of course, I suppose you had a little something to do with that, too.
Yeah, well,
It was interesting working with the two of them because Kathy, as a stage-trained actor, loved a lot of rehearsal. Jimmy, as a film actor, loved to be instinctive with everything. He didn't want any rehearsal. So we had to, have more rehearsal than Jimmy wanted and less rehearsal than Kathy wanted. So, but it was an interesting mix. Barry Sonnenfeld had shot When Harry Met Sally. I met him. He was shooting Throw Mama from the Train, and Billy suggested him because he has a sense of humor. He had shot all these Coen Brothers movies up till that point, and he shot Misery. And great thing about Barry, and then he's gone on to become a really, really successful director. He's got this great sense of humor. He's as weird a guy. I mean, I love him because he also introduced my wife and me to, so that was, we like him for that reason. But he's a great guy. And Barry, he would say things like, the first day of shooting on Misery, there's a cigarette and there's a match and a glass of champagne. And all he had to do, he had finished the novel, all he had to do was light the cigarette and to give a thing like this. And I said, and he takes the cigarette and he's going like this and he's going like that. And I said, no, Jimmy, it's like, think about it as if you just had sex, and it's like over and you just relax and it's just that. And he's doing again and again and again. And he's doing and he's all over the map because he's all got this, he's physical. That's what was good about it. And he, over and over, finally, I get him, he does it. And then we break for lunch and we're sitting in the trailer and Barry says, hey, Rob, do you ever think this could be your Vietnam? Because you could get out right now. He was like saying, this could be the worst thing. I said, no, it'll work. So he's great in that way. And then he'll be, he'll come up to you and he'll say, okay, you have a choice and you have to make the choice. That you're stuck on a desert island the rest of your life. There are two songs. You have to pick one of them, either In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida or I Am Woman. And that's the only song you have, and he'll make you make that choice. Or you can make love to that grip over there or your mother. And you have to make those kind of things. He's crazy, but he's the best. He's the best. He was the one who said, let's get the camera on the deck. Let's use the prism, the mirror where the lens is literally on the floor, and you can't get a lens on the floor unless you drill a hole in the floor or, you get this mirror to shoot down. He had all these great ideas and inserts and stuff. And at one point, when Jimmy gets out of bed and he's got the thing on the floor and Jimmy's crawling towards the camera, and you can't put a mark down because they can see the mark. It's right on the floor. So we got to figure out, where does Jimmy stop? He's got to stop at a certain point because it's right there. And so Barry, he spits on the floor and he says, Jimmy, crawl to the loogie. That's where you crawl to the loogie. That's where you go. So that's Barry.
I'm your #1 fan.
As I've gone along, you learn more and more about what lenses can do. I mean, like in Stand By Me, when the boys are on the train trestle and they're being chased by the train, obviously we don't want to put the boys in danger. So the boys and the train were never on the trestle at the same time. We use a 600 millimeter lens and it looked like the boys were right in front of the train. So you learn these things and you learn these tricks, and certain films, require certain types of things. Barry loves wide angles up close. That's perfect for thrillers. I mean, it gives you this kind of semi-distorted, it's not a lot of long lensy stuff. It's a lot of wide angle up close kind of stuff, which is better for that genre. Bob Layton, who I worked with on many, many films, not the last few, but on many of the films I've done, most of the films I've done, he's British, and I met him making making Spinal Tap, because he had cut a lot of BBC documentaries, and so I thought, okay, he'll understand these characters and he'll understand that form. So that became, we bonded. We spent 9 months putting that film together. We actually wrote, you write the film in the cutting room with Chris and Harry and Michael. We all, would weigh in, and that was the writing process. So I got very close to Bob, and then we started working on all these different projects together. And Bob is very smart. I mean, he's incredibly smart and incredibly well-read and well-rounded. And so, he was able to follow whatever genre I bounced into. He was able to go with it and understood, what was the grammar of that particular genre, whether it was Princess Bride or Stand By Me or Misery or A Few Good Men. I mean, that was a courtroom drama. And if you remember at the end of Few Good Men, which I happened to watch recently because my son had never seen it, so we watched it. The last shot is this big high angle in the courtroom and the end in script, which is that old-fashioned courtroom drama, Inherit the Wind kind of thing. So we kind of, we went along with whatever we were doing. And Bob, I said this to many, many times, but I spent more hours in a dark room with him than with any woman that I've ever been with. But now my wife, I've been with her now almost 30 years, so maybe that's eclipsing that. But we definitely bonded and had a great collaboration.
Paul, do you know about the early days at the Kimberley diamond mines? Do you know what they did to the native workers who stole diamonds? Don't worry, they didn't kill them. That would be like junking a Mercedes just because it had a broken spring. No, if they caught them, they had to make sure they could go on working, but they also had to make sure they could never run away. The operation was called hobbling.
Annie, whatever you're thinking about doing, please don't do it.
Any film I make, the editor is assembling as we go, and so by the time we're finished, usually the editor is close to having some kind of rough assembly. We used to do it on film, when we started out before, digital, and it would take him a couple of weeks to do the last few days of the shooting, and then I'd look at it. I don't do this, and this is interesting, I don't do this anymore. I used to look at a film completely assembled by the editor, and I would sit there and I would get nauseous because it would be a lot of stuff that I didn't want to see in the movie and all. And as it turns out with Bob, he got to know me, so he didn't put a lot of the garbage that I shot in there. Now, what I do is, I don't even look at an assembly. I come back and now it's another Bob Joyce, who is sensational. I've done 3 movies with him now. We'll just start working on the scenes together. I mean, he's already done assemblies of all these scenes, and he's amazing. He does it very different than Bob Layton. He actually cuts to music. He takes music and puts the kind of music he feels would, and he cuts to the music. And when I used to work with Bob, we never used music. We just cut dry and then add music to it. So it's, just different ways of working. So I'm looking at something that I kind of know what it is before I first look at it, because then I avoid nausea. I avoid being nauseous. Mark had composed on, well, he did some music on When Harry Met Sally. He put a lot of it together. He didn't do Princess Bride, but he did do When Harry Met Sally. He did When Harry Met Sally and then Misery. He doesn't start until the film's finished, and that way he can look at it and see what the feel of it. You know, we talk. I mean, I've known Mark for you know, a zillion years. I mean, he used to work with Billy Crystal, he worked with Bette Midler, and I've known him since he's a really young guy, and I've done a lot of films with him. This guy is amazingly versatile. I mean, he's a genius. I mean, you think about just the spectrum of types of stuff, you know, between Misery, A Few Good Men, Hairspray. I mean, you know, it's just, he's like a, you know, he was a child prodigy, and now he's an old prodigy. Stephen King doesn't consult. Once he sells his book, and with Castle Rock, he literally we'd option the book for $1. He'd give us every book for $1 because he trusted that we would do okay with his stuff. But then once he's done that, he's gone. He doesn't, you know, he doesn't, you know, until he sees the movie. And I got to tell you, the first time on Stand By Me, I was nervous because this was a very personal story to him. He actually had 3 friends. He did this journey to see this body, and 3 of his friends actually wound up dead. And we made some changes, and I only had one guy die because I didn't feel like all 3 would die, even though in real life that's what happened to him. When we showed it to Stephen King and we watched it, and then afterwards he said, let me just think about this for a second. Let me go. And I go, oh my God, I hope you like. He says, you know, sometimes you see things, and I watched that movie and I thought, why didn't I think of Gordy picking up that gun? That was so much better, you know. So, you know, you never know. And the first time I met Stephen King, he went to shake hands with me, and he had a fake rat in his hand. And I thought, oh, this is perfect, you know. Hey, how are you? Hey, well, you know.
This is it. Very first copy.
Now, what's interesting is at the end of Misery, if you remember in the book, Paul Sheldon goes back to writing Misery, that he only fakes burning the manuscript, you know, the Misery book, and actually has it published, and then goes back to it because the fear of, you know, Annie Wilkes, or the people who Annie Wilkes represents, you know, he can't break away. In the movie, he does burn the Misery book, and he does go on to write something else. And you know, he's alive at the end, and he's able to face down. He's tormented by Annie. He still is, you know, he sees apparitions of her, but he's willing to go on with his life. And so that was a big difference that we made that change.
I just want to tell you I'm your #1 fan.
That's very sweet of you.
He loved Misery when he first saw it. He was sitting right in front of me in the theater. We screened it in Century City, and he just, you know, he was really happy. Now, we didn't have in the book, she cuts the guy's foot off. We only had the ankle break, because again, I felt like I wanted this guy to have gone through this horror of this experience and come out whole and not defeated. There you go, defeated.
Paul, you can't!
The thing that's great about Stephen King is that, aside from the fact that he tells a great story, he has great characters and great dialogue, he also has a great sense of humor. And sometimes it's this kind of black comedy, but sometimes it's just right out there. And that I love about him, and that he's able to blend those things together. So when I see, he didn't get out of the cock-a-doodle car, or he's, I'm going to put on all my Liberace records. I mean, I love that stuff. Or when she's, snorting like a pig or whatever. Those things are great because they're in the same movie as the movie where, she shoots Buster in the back. I mean, it's that. So, you have to find a way to balance those things. I mean, to me, what makes it successful is, for you as a filmmaker, is did you achieve what you set out to do? Did you realize what you wanted to do? It's up to the people, the critics and the audiences decide that they like it, they didn't like it, whatever. But as a filmmaker, you're trying to express something. And did you realize it in the way that you thought about it in your head? And so if you've done that, you're successful. That's all. It's like, and then they are all your children. So everybody can run around and say, I hate this, I like that, this one stinks, this one's good. But that's up to other people to decide.